Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
All right, great. So I'm Neil Barclay. I have the great privilege of being the president of the Wright Museum these days. It's a great privilege to not only have that role, but to be able to take this moment to welcome you all to the Wright Museum. You're in a newly renovated space. Some of you who've been in here before may notice some of the changes and differences. It's still a little bit of a work in progress, and you're seeing the basic redesign, however, but this was a result of some ARPA funding, some funding from the state, and some funding from the Knight Foundation that has allowed us to create a space for Black artists and creatives to really work with equipment, sound and lighting equipment that's, state of the art. So about $1 million worth of equipment you see in the air, surround sound, projection equipment for film. So we're really excited about the possibilities of this room, and we hope that you will come back and see performances and join us. I wanted to welcome Michon Lartigue and all of you at Heritage Works, the work you do in this community. I don't have to speak to. I think your work speaks for itself. It's obviously outstanding, and we're always happy to be able to work and collaborate with you on your program. Today, though, I have the pleasure of being with three women who I've known, I want to say my entire life. But what I mean by that is my entire life in the arts, and I've been doing this for many, many decades. We were laughing earlier because these women and a couple of other friends of ours, at one point I saw them all at once, right? Coming, I don't know where they were, but Harlem. Yeah. And I referred to them as these women are the Black Mafia, because they were controlling the creative output of so much of what was happening in the Black arts and culture sector at the time I was coming up in the field. So Stephanie, I think I succeeded one place. Mikki has been my consigliere. What was that word? Yeah, she basically tells me what I'm supposed to do next. And then Baraka, of course.
When I was at Yerba Buena
and Houston and all. So I've known them a long time. So to have them here is a great honor and privilege for me. And I think what they have to share with us will be a tremendous insight. They really made a lot of the field, certainly on the performance side of the work that we do. So welcome. So without further ado, though, I want to have Shana, I get it right, Hayward, come forward and give a few remarks for you. Once again, thank you for coming. I hope you'll come back. Sabrina Nelson's exhibition is on view. We're installing an exhibition on our collection, so you'll be able to see some of the things that are in the collection. You'll notice outside we've redone the hall to also give us some more space to show the things that the Wright keeps on behalf of all of you. So,
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. I'm so honored to be in the space with you all this evening, and thank you to Neil as well. So I have a couple of charges before I hand it off to Michon. One is to provide a little bit of the spiritual roots and context for our time together this evening in this gathering. So starting with first the spiritual, I'd like to share a verse from Deuteronomy 32 and 30, which says, "One person cannot chase 1,000 people, and 2 people cannot fight 10,000 unless their rock has sold them, unless the Lord has given them up." And so this verse speaks to the power of God and the exponential impact of partnership in God. And as we are charged with modeling that ourselves, we are in the presence of 3 women who will be talking about their partnerships and how they have held each other in love, faith, and esteem through the good and the bad. And what we're here to do tonight is to see what we might learn from them. And so we do this in the context of a wisdom circle. And wisdom circles are used across many cultures and many contexts. Indigenous people, various countries. Heritage Works uses wisdom circles as a part of our work as well. We have been doing this for 20 years in different contexts and different ways. And so just to share a little bit with you, one of the critical pieces of the wisdom circle is the transfer of knowledge across generations, which can often be lost, and creating a space and a place for that sharing and for asking questions and for the exchange. And so that is what we're here to experience. The other charge I have before I take my seat is just to express our sincere appreciation and gratitude for the many folks that have allowed tonight to come together. Of course, our partner and partnership with the Wright Museum. The funders that have supported this, which include the National Endowment for the Arts, the Kresge Foundation, the Irv Family Foundation, and the Hudson Weber Foundation. And then, of course, the visionary planners who have been a part of making this happen, Njia Kai, Michon Lartigue, and Miss Stephanie Hughley on our panel. So, also, of course, I need to thank Ms. Rhonda Green, the Executive Director of Heritage Works, for her visionary leadership in all of this as well. And so with that, Michon, I will turn it over to you to carry us into this night.
Wonderful, thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. My name is Michon Lartigue, and I am the Senior Vice President of Institutional Advancement here at the Charles H. Wright Museum. And I cannot tell you all, I'm just gonna start with that gratitude and grounding, because the three women sitting on the stage here, I am here in part because of them. I have watched their work, I have worked with them, I have followed their guidance and counsel. And we are in for a treat tonight, because this is actually I think I can say this publicly, this is one of the first times that they have had this conversation publicly. And so it is just the gratitude I feel to be a part of it is tremendous. So I just want to start with thank you as well as to Njia and Rhonda, who are phenomenal. I also want to thank the staff and here at the Wright Museum. They are an incredible group of folks, and so all the moving pieces. So I do also want to start with gratitude, so thank you, Shauna. So this conversation tonight is really about what it means to support each other when you are negotiating space and trying to create art. And we have three pioneers, and instead of going and reading bios, I want to really start with each of them introducing themselves to you all. Many of you already know, but we really want to introduce them. And so I want to ask you all to tell us a little bit about yourself, each of you. We can start with you, Stephanie. But in addition to telling us about yourself, can you share kind of a favorite highlight from your career, as well as what you hope to get from this conversation tonight? That will be our start and introduction. Highlight from these illustrious careers.
Okay, so I grew up in a small little Midwest town not far from here. I used to come to Detroit all the time. I got it for 20 grand in Greystone. I didn't really get exposed to the arts until I was in college. I grew up in a time just as civil rights was kind of transitioning into Black Power. So we were in college during Black Power days, and we were leading at Kent State University, Black Student United Together. And I think that's probably where I really got grounded. We had an African ball, and one of the sisters who was from Nigeria, asked me if I would participate in a dance that she wanted to create. I had never danced before. But I said, sure, I was athletic enough, you know. So that performance really grounded me in something that we already were Black and proud. We were already, you know, taking charge of our own stories, of having our voices heard. And so, but that dance, the grounding of African dance anyway, kind of grounded me in an expression, a creative expression of myself. And so it led me into a career of dance, which I danced my way to Boston, to the Honolulu School of Fine Arts, where I immersed myself in dance and met a lot of choreographers from New York. But Honolulu School of Fine Arts was really a school about all of the arts. And Miss Lewis was really focused on people of African descent and the contributions that they had made. That was the first time she had a company that was a ballet company in addition to an African and Caribbean dance company. And I'd never seen a Black girl dance on point. And these girls would take them point shoes off and dance, do African dance, they could tap dance, and I'd never seen anything like it. I met a bunch of choreographers there and ended up going to New York, studied a little bit at Ailey's and Clark Center, and met a bunch of folks in the dance community, but also in the theater community. I auditioned for a show, didn't get in, but met the general manager, got a job in the theater community, and that kind of transitioned me from dance into theater. I spent about 10 years on Broadway, off-Broadway, international touring as a manager, because once I decided I couldn't perform on the stage, I wanted to bring my creativity to the management side, to the artistic side. So I've always considered myself an artist. And I knew that I could type and file and answer the phone and negotiate, talk to people. And so I learned so much in that apprenticeship program. One day the general manager, Ashton Springer, told me to come with him. He walked me into this union called ATPAM, the Association of Theatrical Press Agents and Managers, and walked me in front of lines of their families, which, that union story. And next thing I knew, I was an intern in ATPAM. And about a year later, I got a call from Joseph Kapp, the New York Shakespeare Festival, and Emmanuel Eisenberg, who was one of the top producers on Broadway. And they asked me if I would come to lunch with them. And they offered me the opportunity to take a show out on the road because this fiery writer, author woman had written this play called The Colored Girls. Suicide and rainbows enough. If I would take that, she told them that they couldn't take the show out unless they had a Black woman company manager. And so, just like that, I was out on the road with The Colored Girls, and this show was a phenomenon. It was a hit everywhere we went. I came to Detroit with that show. Nobody knew what it was. They said Black girls who killed themselves. Anyway, it catapulted me into the theater community. I did Broadway shows, a bunch of Broadway shows. And then I ended up moving to Atlanta, where I had one of the greatest experiences of my life in helping in the creation of the National Black Arts Festival, which Mikki Shepard and her partner had actually done the feasibility study for. So I'm sure we'll talk about that later. I ended up at the helping to create the National Black Arts Festival, phenomena, 8 disciplines: music, theater, dance, film, visual art, performing art, literary art, and folk art. And we started working together there, actually. It really started building a relationship, a sisterhood. And then from there, I went to the New Jersey, first I went to the Cultural Olympiad. Atlanta won the Olympics in '96. And so they wanted to do a festival every year leading up to the festival. So I actually worked on the Cultural Olympiad. Made another life-changing experience, got to travel all over the world. And because Africa had helped Atlanta win the games, Andy Young wanted to focus on Africa. So I got to travel all around the continent and bring over amazing artists during that time. And I left there and went to the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, where we helped to build that art center in Newark. Hello, Newark, New Jersey. I took a rock at that. Newark and Detroit was where the real black people live. We opened the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. We got to work more together there as the vice president of programming for that first 4 years. Left there, went back to Atlanta, worked on the Black Arts Festival. Jessica Carrimore was there, and we got dismissed from the Arts Center.
Oh, that is definitely a
Got dismissed, and I ended up going over to the Brooklyn Academy of Music, where I ended up kind of semi-retiring. My mother tells me I'm flunking retirement right now. Taking these consultant jobs like with Robert Green. And so that has led me to an illustrious career. I can't tell you, I feel like we kind of came up in a time where there weren't a lot of us, and we met each other, mutual friends said, oh, you need to meet these people, because these women, because there aren't a lot of you all, you need a network, you need a support system.
Yes.
And so it kind of, our lives have just intertwined.
And so what do you hope tonight to get from this conversation? And then we'll move to Mikki.
That's a good question. I hope to get and give a wonderful sharing time. Hopefully we can say things that might inspire one another, because we consistently keep learning. And so, yes, we'll learn and share more.
Thank you. Mikki?
I'm Mikki Shepard. I've been working in the performing arts field for about over 55 years. And I started when I was very young. I come from Brooklyn, and I'm a real Brooklynite. My heart and soul is there. But I always say, my father's from Harlem, and but I grew up in Brooklyn. And I always say that my soul is in Harlem, but my heart is in Brooklyn. You know? It really is what drove me to do a lot of the things that I do, and I was heavily influenced by that. My work has been as a producer, presenter, curator, a philanthropist, and I've also advised a lot of foundations on work, and I've worked with a lot of artists, and I'll talk a little bit about what that has meant for me. But my work has been centered on art and culture from the African diaspora. That's really kind of what my primary work has been in anything that I do, with a focus on building new institutions and also reimagining existing institutions and creating a platform for emerging artists, particularly of color, so we can hear some new voices and contemporary artists in particular, but also connecting the art with the community. That's been very important to me. It's not just about who's on the stage, it's about who's in the audience, right? So, because it does make some difference if you're just doing the art, creating the art for yourself as an artist, or presenting it for someone. And it's beyond just the presentation, it's about the engagement in a more deeper way, and I think that's something that I've always considered. But for me, my work started, I wanted to be a dancer, and my parents were totally opposed to that. You know, you had to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, you know, the story. And so I decided to be a lawyer, and then I changed my mind, decided to be a math major when I was in school. I don't really know why. Then I decided to change it to language, and I had to end up taking Russian because I wanted to take French, and I already took Spanish for 4 years in high school, and French, the classes were closed, so I had no choice. I had a boyfriend who said, I'll take Russian, you take it. Neither one of us knew anything about Russian, but I did very well, actually. And so I think my mother thought that meant that I was going to have a different kind of career. However, when I was about 17, I started college when I was young, and I was 17, it was my first year in college, and during the summer, a friend of mine, Steve Bowser, who some of you know, was seeing my sister, and I needed a summer job, and he got me a job at the Parks and Recreation Department for New York City. At the time, there was no Department of Cultural Affairs, and they then started the Department of Cultural Affairs, and I came for the second year. You know, it was under Mayor Lindsay, and I don't know if you know who he is at the time. He was a very young mayor, one of the youngest mayors of New York City. And he hired a lot of young people to run his agencies. And so people were in their 20s and 30s running, had never done this before. And so it wasn't unusual that I would be 17 or 18 doing something like what I was doing at the time. A job came up and I took it. But I took it because of a man named Courtney Callender, who was an African-American man who was probably one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life, and influenced the work that I do and really drove me to this field. And he stole my park line to put me in cultural affairs at the time. I was kind of angry about it, but then I realized, what a gift it was for me to be able to work with him. He was also, when it became a Department of Cultural Affairs, he was the first Deputy Commissioner of Cultural Affairs. And he should have been the commissioner, but they could not make him the commissioner. They made Dory Sherry the producer, the Hollywood producer, the commissioner, but Courtney did all the work. And a lot of what you see in New York in particular, which has been used as a model for other cities, was really in the arts, was created by him. And most people don't know that. But one of the things that he did that was really important, which really, again, set me on a particular path, was that he realized that most of the money, city money in the arts, was going to major museums and opera companies and symphony orchestras and ballet companies, and none of it was going to artists and organizations of color. And he opened that up so that those organizations could have, and there were a lot of them because it still was some in the early days, this was in the late 60s. But that really, the organizations that you know of now, they started then, So whether it was, LA was already in existence, and Dance at Her Home but they were young companies, very young companies. And there were others like Ballet Hispanico that didn't even start then. She had an education program, and she got money from the city, and that's how it started. But what it showed me was that there was this inequity, and there was a role for me in this. So that's really what drove me, along with my values, and it really drove my career in terms of what I was going to do and what I wasn't going to do. I left there. He took me to the Brooklyn Academy of Music. He was the associate director, and I became his assistant, and I stayed on. And then I left after a year and came back to produce the first Dance Africa Festival with Chuck Davis, which some of you probably know. And I produced it for 5 years, and that was a gift to be able to work with Chuck for that time. The thing about the Brooklyn Academy of Music and Cultural Affairs was that, for me, it was a moment in time, and I think just to provide a little context, and Stephanie alluded to it, is that the time that we came up, we were children of the Civil Rights Movement, and the Black Arts Movement, and the Black Power Movement. And so that meant that, we were in a time of pioneer territory as far as the business of the arts was concerned. Nobody knew how to do anything. Believe me, no one. It was all trial and error, but there was this freedom because there were no rules, there were no books, there were no management programs, graduate programs that we have today. We had to figure it out on our own.
And make it up.
And fail. You took risks and you failed. But it was such an exciting and extraordinary time to work in the field because you were building what you all see today, right? That's where we were. And it was so empowering to be in that position. And we were a community of like-minded people, and essentially we were arts activists. That was what we did. And so Cultural Affairs and the Brooklyn Academy of Music, for me, were the two places that allowed me to really determine what my path was going to be, what my vision was going to be, and what my values were going to be that were going to really take me through my life's work. Probably the highlight for me of my work at that time was Dance Africa, for sure, no question about it, and then Dance Black America, which was 100 years of black dance in the United States. And that was an incredible, it actually was recorded by D.A. Pennybaker, who it was on PBS and it toured. And it's what it's captured, and this is what tells me how important it is for us to document what we do, is that it captured dancers who you have never seen in your life. People who were older, Catherine Dunham was there, Pearl Primus was there. I mean, these are people who are legends in the dance world. And so to hear their voices, and they weren't just there they weren't performing, but they taught, they were on panels, everyone that Joe Nash, dance historian, I mean, it's endless the number of people who were in the black dance world at that time, both as dancers, choreographers, writers, press people, scholars who came together for this festival, whose voices have kind of disappeared, but that program captured it, and we have the materials and particularly the film from it. So those are probably the most important things for me at that particular time. I left the Brooklyn Academy of Music to start my own consulting firm, and then I was asked to form another organization called 651 Arts, which we'll talk about a little bit when we talk about Africa Exchange. And I ran that organization for about 9 years, and then I went to the Rockefeller Foundation to be the director of humanities. And then I left there and started working as a consultant around international work. And then I decided I did not want to work full-time for any organization because I had done a lot of work and I was tired of it until the Apollo Theater came knocking on the door. And I decided that, of course, how could you turn down the Apollo Theater? And I became the executive producer there. And so all the work that I've done in the field has been steeped in this idea of art and culture from the African diaspora, creating these forums for artists to have the platforms to work. The next generation, really becoming mentors to the next generation, not just administrators, but artists, and about connecting audiences. That's been the most important thing to me.
What do you hope for tonight, this conversation?
Well, I always learn from everyone that's here. The questions that people ask, my colleagues here, and I always learn something about these tonight because we don't ever remember the same thing. So it's really interesting to hear it. Earlier today, Stephanie and I were talking about Rhonda asked us a question about how we met. Stephanie gave her an answer, and I'm like, no, that's not the answer. That's how we met. But then as we started to talk, we realized, oh yeah, this is what it was. And so, so you always learn, and so I'm learning, but also to Stephanie's point, it's about sharing.
Thank you.
Baraka. And that's why Baraka Sele documents.
And she's our archivist. She's our archivist.
Can't argue with her.
No.
So now that I think about it and I hear my sisters speaking, I often say in my biographies that I've been working the arts for 40 years. And now that I hear this, yes, it goes actually back in college at Eastern Michigan University.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we're going to talk about that. At Eastern Michigan University, I was not only part of the folks who protested, marched, prayed, and got Black Studies at Eastern Michigan University, and also was hired their first student hiree, and also first hiree of the Minority Affairs Department, and we were responsible for bringing artists, Black artists. So we brought Amiri Baraka, we brought Sonia Sanchez, we brought Gil Scott Heron to Eastern Michigan University, and we're talking about the early 70s. But before I get into all that, I think it's important for me to talk about the context. And because we always hear the bio stuff. Well, I did this, I did that, I went here, I went there. But I want to talk about, first of all, where I've come from. I survived my birth. My mother did not. She died in childbirth. And my father was killed in the Korean War. So I've been told. I am not purebred. I don't have any pedigrees. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, at Herman Kiefer Hospital in 1950. At that time, the hospital was established in 1893, and at that time was noted for caring for indigent and poor people with infectious diseases, scarlet fever, smallpox, tuberculosis. So I had a precarious beginning as an infant and an orphan. Growing up, I did not know it was important to gather family stories. We now call them narratives and oral histories. My adopted parents did not volunteer a whole lot of information about their respective pasts. What I know about them mostly I gleaned from crafted curiosity. In other words, asking questions that did not cross the line of don't get into grown folks' business. So I'm actually proud and pleased to say that also at Eastern Michigan University, I had an opportunity to meet Detroit's, I know Jessica Care Moore is your current poet laureate, but before that, was it, and you can't answer, before that, did anyone know who that poet laureate was? Yes. Yeah. Naomi Long Madgett. So Naomi Long Madgett was one of my professors at Eastern Michigan University. But not only that, as a graduate student, I had her read my poetry. She marked it up with the most horrible red marks. I almost cried. But when I reworked those poems and gave them back to her, she said, I'm starting a publishing company. It's called Lotus Press. I'd like to publish your work. And I'm still an undergraduate student at Eastern Michigan University. But I must say my first poem was actually published by the Detroit News. It was about the riots in Detroit. So I want to talk about where I come from. And this is actually an excerpt from one of my poems, if you don't mind. I cannot imagine, and perhaps will never know, what enticed Sabbath Emanuel, my father's name, and Claudia May, my mother's name, to leave Detroit and purchase 28 acres of farmland in rural Michigan. I thought the whole point of the Great Migration was get a good job in the city. Instead, they decided to adopt a hard life, to sickle, to rake, to hoe, to plow, to plant, to harvest, to endure back-breaking work. Instead, they decided to build their own home, raise their own chickens, grow their own vegetables, dig a well for their own water. I never thought to ask, and now perhaps I will never know, what lured them to the great outdoors, the sturdy white birch trees, the timid white-tailed deer, the scrutinizing eyes, and sidelong looks of white people. Because I have to say, the community that I grew up in, which is now called Canton, was nothing but wilderness when I lived there. And so we called where we lived Belleville, now they call it Canton. And now it's all that 28 acres is called suburbia. And Land Rovers and people pushing baby carts. So I wanted to read that and I wanted to speak about that because from that humble beginning, I am blessed to say, like these women, I have traveled all over the world. I've been blessed beyond measure. I've traveled and worked with artists in Asia, in Africa, in Central America and the Caribbean, in South America, and you know, again, we can talk about our resumes, but I don't know, for me the most important thing is where I've come from. The first job, professional job, not at Eastern Michigan, the first professional job I had was at Some Arts in Houston, Texas. None of you have ever heard of it. But Some Arts, with a staff of 3 people, we had a lot of those experiences, brought to Houston, Texas, Miles Davis, Sarah Vaughan, Pharoah Saunders, Ntozake Shange, again, folks like Amiri Baraka, and myself. I got my first job because I was asked to open up a concert for Pharoah Saunders. And so after that concert, someone said, you should go to work for these folks. And I said, go to work for them? What do they do? And they said, well, the same thing they did with you. They hire artists, they put them on stages. And I said, and that's a full-time job? And that full-time job turned into a 40, 50 plus year career. So I'm actually the thing that and I have to say, this is very important. In addition to, while I was at Eastern Michigan University, I had the great honor and pleasure to join the Shrines of the Black Madonna. And yes, that is a wow. That is a wow. Because I just want to say, for people who don't know, the shrine at that time, I just have to say this. Shrine members were required to read, research, study African history, geography, religions, psychology, sociology, as well as African liberation leaders and movements, including military strategy and guerrilla warfare. Such eminent and African Black scholars as Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. John Henry Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben Yakanan, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Lana Karanga, all those and more visited the Shrines of the Black Madonna and taught us all the things that gave us a grounding in Black history, culture, and lives. So the thing that I want to get out of this conversation, I know she's trying to move us along. The most important thing is finding your people. Not everybody is going to be your people. 2, working with people who have the same level of experience, competence, and commitment that you do. Finding people who can give you honest feedback, be your mirrors, and your support network. And then finally, in addition to document, because people forget, people get confused, and people lie. So I document everything.
Can I stop you there? Because that right there.
Yes, you can. Thank you. Yes.
No, and one of the reasons why, just so that we all know that we are going to have a question and answer period, and I want to be mindful of time.
Yes.
One of the things that I think is really important and beautiful about just listening to each of you share. You share from a beautiful grounding of who you are. And we're here tonight, we're talking about sisterhood. And part of what I think, particularly, many who know that you all are different, that you all have different personalities. And I think it was a beautiful example in just hearing you all talk about yourselves. What I want to get into with the time that we have is what it means to define a sisterhood that carries you through the years and enables and empowers you to be able to do what you've done. And I think it's important, one, for the room to hear, because what you all have done to sit here, the three of you together, over a series of years, and I'm sure trials and tribulations, and I'm also sure joys, I think it's important to define, one, what sisterhood means to you. And I also think, because part of what you've spoken about is that you had a freedom to build, right? And so we also want to hear from you all tonight about things are built, so where does that freedom exist now? Right? And how do those of us who are in the room who want to either, I have experienced that sisterhood, so I know what it means, but I know, and I learned this year, that everyone has not. So it's really important, I think, for us to have an opportunity to hear, and let's just start with the definition of sisterhood. And you can either sort of speak to it in terms of how you met, which I think is probably a really fascinating story, since we have different ideas about how you met. But how would you all define sisterhood? Mikki, let me
just say this. I will say that I have a lot of sisters, real sisters, I mean, I said real blood sisters.
Yeah.
But, and so I understand what that means to have a sister who you love, no matter what they do. For me,
Yeah.
what they do, you know who they are, and you know that you don't always agree with them.
Yeah.
You always like what they do, but you love them, and you care for them, and you respect them. That's my thing. That's what I come from. So for me, starting out, it's, when I talk about sister, it has to be that too. And the values that we hold are really important. And again, I do go back to the civil rights movement because the values in the civil rights movement are what are my values. In terms of, and I think about Ubuntu, I don't know if you know that word, Ubuntu. It's an African word that means I am because we are. And so, and I really believe that. But the values are honesty and integrity, respect, trust, collaboration. That's really a grounding for us to start with. And we don't just say that. We are serious about it. We will tell you the truth. That's who we are. And we will tell each other the truth. And we're very
Brutal as
honest
it might be.
Brutal as it might be. We just do that. But there's something else that I think in terms of the sisterhood being sustained has a lot to do with the fact that when we met each other, we were professionals. We were not emerging. We were professionals. We had, all of us had worked for major institutions doing major productions, you know, high quality work, and we knew of each other's work even if we didn't know each other. Because in the field that we grew up in,
There were 5 of us.
yeah, fine, right.
There were 5
Right.
in the nation. It was Stephanie Hughley, Mikki Shepard, Baraka Sele, Cullings Jennings Robinson, and I don't know if you remember our sister who is no longer living in San Antonio,
Joy
Long. There were 5 of us.
That was it.
That was it.
And everybody had this this vision and commitment. We had a very similar commitment because of where we came from, the place that we had this similar lived experience. And so I think that, but I think it's really important to understand that the sustainability of that sisterhood had to do with what we were doing together. It wasn't just us being wherever we were. Well, we did call each other for advice, but it wasn't just that. We actually worked together on major projects, and we knew that we would deliver.
We could trust each other.
Absolutely.
I knew that if Mikki said something, that was it. I didn't have to think about it anymore. I'm going on to the next thing. Same thing with Baraka. I mean, we kind of had this I don't know, it was like a spiritual connection, that there was a trust that we built quickly because we had such a mutual respect for one
But let
another.
me just say this one thing, because talk about story. Stephanie introduced me to Baraka during the National Black Arts. We also have a question about whether that's the case or not. But in any event, Stephanie was at NJPAC, and I was at 651 Arts, and we had this African exchange program, which Baraka, we were talking about it. But I said to Stephanie, you know, we need somebody to run this program. And Baraka was living in San Francisco, and we said, and Stephanie said, I said, but I don't have a full-time salary for her. And Stephanie said, I don't have a full-time salary. So well, let's just get her to come here to live in New York and do this program.
It's a colored country girl.
So we called her and said, Baraka, you have to come to New York.
You got a job.
We have a job for you. You're going to work with Stephanie, and you're going to, well, we work with.
That's right, yes, work with.
Because you don't work, it's not for.
Nobody works for you.
Exactly. We work with each other. And I say that to say because we understood what our strengths were and what our weaknesses were, what we needed, and who we needed to do it. And so we called on our sisters.
I have to interrupt her. Like you said, this is about stories, right? Okay, so I'm a colored country girl. I've been raised on a farm. And you know, these jobs took me to these other places. Well, actually, the Shrine of the Black Madonna took me to, because when I became a member of the Shrine, I ended up going to Atlanta, to Houston. But then when I'm in San Francisco, and they say, you gotta come to New York, you know what entered my mind? Mug, rape, murder. That's exactly what I thought. I'm like, there's no way I'm moving to New York City. I'm gonna get killed. I know nothing about the subways. I know nothing about New York. I'm like, you are out of your minds.
But you were hating San Francisco.
I hated San Francisco.
This is when Baraka was getting ready to open up the Yerba Buena Gardens. There was a big headline in the San Francisco Chronicle that said, Bach, Beethoven, Baraka, question mark. I was like, you need to come away from this. We got something serious going on over here. Mikki had come to Atlanta to talk to me about this big initiative of the Ford Foundation called Internationalizing New Work.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do a component on Africa. And so they were talking to her at 651 about taking that Africa part on. So she came to me and said, are you interested? And I was like, girl, we don't know nothing about Africa. I've never been to Africa. The only person I know that's been to Africa was Baraka Sele. And so what we decided was that we weren't going to let Ford Foundation dictate to us what it had to be. We came back to them and said, this is a program that we want to create around Africa. First, we got to go there. We got to take artists with us. We'll meet people there. We'll meet presenters. And, we'll create a program that then we'll come back to you and say, this is what we want to do.
What did they say to us? They said, oh, well, we don't think this is what you should do. We think you should do something, And we said, well, then we're not doing it. And that is so important because,
right there.
that is so important because they were offering us millions of dollars.
Yes.
And the person who was heading that program, who we liked a lot,
Yes.
was this woman, Christine Vincent, who we really thought highly of. But we knew what it took to do this. And we said, in order for us to do this, this is what we need. And if you can't do it, we understand, but we can't do it.
Yeah. Africa is a country for most people.
Right.
It's like it's a continent. They're speaking 300 languages in one country. And so we were like, no, we cannot. And I had already met Baraka, who had just, of course, immersed me in Black history and culture. And she had been to Africa and she was so knowledgeable about so much. So I was like, we need her.
So can I ask you all a question then about that? Because part of what you heard me reference earlier was negotiating space, right, as a sisterhood. And so what has been, I would say, an ask, sort of what happens when you have a challenge to your sisterhood, right? Because people want you to present and be different, people may want to break it up, so can you just talk a little bit about what that looks like and feels for you?
Can I start with a very important point? I was actually very grateful for the sister who started off with the scripture from Deuteronomy, because one of the things I would like to talk about is how I met Stephanie Hughley. I was at the Houston International Festival, which at that time, you may have never heard of it, but at that time it was not only the largest cultural event in Houston, it was the largest cultural event in Texas, it was the largest cultural event in the United States, and according to an organization called Festivals International, it was the largest cultural celebration in North America. I was the only Black employee at that festival. And so I had met Kalama Yasalam, some of you know that name, who was at that time the executive director of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. So I went to sit at his feet and learn from him, but then when I conveyed to him some of these issues I was having, the only Black person at this major festival, he said, well, you need a support network. I was like, I don't even know what that is. What's a support network? And he says, someone, especially a Black woman, who does what you do. I said, I don't know any Black women who do what I do, because we had not all connected at that time, Michon. And so he gave me the number, I called her, and one of the first things she says is, I work for God. Now, I was the only person that I had ever heard say that before. I used to tell people all the time, this job may be important to you, it's not that important to me. Because I know who my master is, I know who my boss is.
Right.
Yes.
And we should not use that term because it's a term that comes out of slavery and oppression. I know who I work for. So I called her, and the next thing I know, we were like sisters. Exactly.
And that would then speak to the challenges. I saw you
Exactly.
say, I know exactly. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, what I was gonna say is that it probably helped us develop this attitude that we didn't chase the money and we didn't care about the jobs. We cared about the work. We felt like if we just did the work, the money would follow us. And that's exactly what happened to most of our careers together. We created what we believed was important, particularly for us as a community. And the monies, the funding came. And so I feel like that helped us because we were all very independent. You talk about negotiating. We had to negotiate our own relationship first because it was so different. You know, we were like two extremes and Nikki's in the middle of the country.
That's exactly right.
But we learned to negotiate with each other when we met challenges because we always had a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
We were the only ones. So we were dealing with negotiating outside the space as we learned to negotiate inside so that when we stepped outside, we were ready. You know?
And I think that's a really important point because if you remember, the program that the Ford Foundation supported 5 organizations, 2 for Asia, 2 for Latin America, and 1 for Africa, and we were the ones for Africa. And we created, the other organizations, it was about their organization. For us, it was about all the other organizations. And so 651 Arts was the home of Africa, but it was like hub and spokes. We had so many arts partners, educational institutions. Yes, you know, I mean, across the entire country, we had educational institutions, I mean, major institutions, our arts organizations, everyone from Kronos Quartet to the Brooklyn Academy of Music to, I mean, Michigan, yeah, Ann Arbor, the University Musical Society. We had folks from all over the country who were part of a network so that they could bring forward ideas about U.S.-based artists, because the program was about U.S.-based artists and African artists collaborating on new work, which is a whole other point here, because they have to know, people have to know each other before they do the work, right? But in any event, people could come and get money to see these initiatives
And
collaborations.
Yeah.
And so, but what you have to remember is the people who we were dealing with were considered the leaders in the field. And
Now, let's be very clear, the white male leaders.
but it was
If
mostly
we
white
can be
men.
very honest.
Yes. And what happened was when the Ford Foundation gave us the money to do this, all of a sudden, we had a seat at the table. But not only a seat at the table, we had the money. And so we were the ones that people had to now deal with. But we had relationships with a lot of these organizations and individuals. But the fact is, here were these women and that had control over a lot of money and were deciding what this program was going to be. We called ourselves primary partners.
Mhm.
And,
Or the Black Mafia.
well, and so and talk about the challenge. I think what people realized, and to Neil's point, was that you just couldn't get around any one of us. You had to deal with all
Yeah,
of
that's
us.
because people were trying to do the.
You know, it was like, oh, I talked to Stephanie, and it was like, no, we talk to each other all the time.
That is a wonderful, that's amazing. I want to build on that because I feel like that is something when you talk about sort of a group and people are in a close kinship, a lot of times what fractures those
Yes.
are those kinds of things, right? And so how did you, just for people, especially women in here who are either trying to build a sisterhood or sustain one, how did you maintain that united front? Was it calls at night? Was it, what was in addition to the spiritual connection? Because that's very clear. How did you build that united front?
I am so proud to say, we spent a lot of personal time with each other. Even to this day, and you don't see the whole mafia here. There's 2 other women whose names I need to mention, and that's Laura Greer, who's now still at the Apollo, and Linda Walton, who was formerly with Heart of Arts Alliance and Arts International. And it was actually the 5 of us who all created Yes, they're a little bit younger than we are. And we spent a lot of time, as a matter of fact, we took retreats.
Yeah.
And that was one of our big fights, as a matter of fact. Stephanie and I got into a big fight, and Linda Walton was like, how can you do this? How can you be friends and talk to each other like this? And Mikki, of course, the person in the middle, said, oh, because they respect each other. They respect each other.
And it's also about how people interact with each other, just before they do at each other's throats, so to speak, and speaking very loud. They did not love each other, that's just a form of communication.
Yes.
To understand that language, then you can say, oh no, that's just them.
That's how they rock.
That's how they rock.
That's how they rock. Is right about spending a lot of time together, because we also went to Africa together.
Yes.
To the festival in Côte d'Ivoire.
Yes.
And which was a whole other story. South Africa. But we traveled a lot together and saw work together and talked about that. Baraka and I went to London for the African
95 festival.
And it was a very funny story. We're walking down the street together, and so Baraka is Baraka, and I think the guy might have had a suit on, and we're walking down the street, and these people keep looking at us, and we would say, well, why do these people keep looking at us? I said, well, Baraka, because they think that you work for me as my secretary, or I work for you because you're the queen. And you know, but it was we were always together doing things. We always traveled together to see work, to go to conferences, and then we would always spend a lot of time talking about what we saw
And what we were going to do.
Yeah.
But let me just say this, Michon, and even now, Stephanie lives now in North Carolina, because, you know, we all used to live in New York. Stephanie now lives in North Carolina. Mikki lives in Florida. Linda Walton also lives in Florida. As I mentioned, Laura Greer is at the Apollo. And we still take time. Just 2 weeks ago, we all gathered, and we try at least twice a year to get together and maintain our friendship. This is critical and key. It wasn't just, well, you go to North Carolina, you go to Florida, bye.
We talk probably every week at least.
And we text almost every single day. Yeah.
You
So-
just start to build a respect for one another. I care about their opinions. You know, whenever I'm getting ready to take on a project or think about, like, okay, so how do I get Mikki involved in this? How do I get? I remember when I was taking this job at the National Black Arts Festival. We all had dinner together, the 5 of us, and I was like, you all should come to Atlanta and help me do this festival. Because if they had, that festival would still be kicking butt. That festival was the most amazing event that happened in our country at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, there was nothing like that festival. So can you imagine if I'd had them with me?
Yeah.
Fulton County would have kicked us out.
Yeah, and did you see Waverly is here too?
Oh, right.
From Atlanta?
Yeah.
But how about the merger we tried to do with the National Black Arts Festival in 651? We said, look, what we could do is we could do every other year National Black Arts Festival in New York,
Yeah.
and then in Atlanta,
Yeah.
and on the off years we do our own programming.
Mm-hmm.
And
What
so
idiot
let's
said
talk
that?
about that and try to do something. We could not get our boards
Wow.
to go with this. We couldn't believe it. You know, it was
Wow.
like we could do this.
I feel like too, because we were the pioneers, we're visionaries.
Mhm.
All of us are visionaries. We could see down into the future what this should be, what it could be. Not just for the Black Arts Festival, but for so many projects. We knew what our Africa Exchange should be on the internet. You should be flipping that thing open and looking where you're going to Africa, how you're going to get there, where you're going to go. I mean, we had vision.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we were just ahead of our time. I think that the people couldn't really grasp
But
the things that we were
you
talking
know, I think
about.
what's important is, and it's something that I sit on 2 foundation boards, so I see a lot in New York. So I see a lot of proposals that come past and with ideas that people have. Here's the thing. I think it was because, and I keep going back to civil rights movement because it changed things. Younger people don't see that change. They don't understand what that was like before that. And it did have incredible change. Maybe it didn't go far enough for some people, but it did, there was change. We saw that change. It was big change. Well, we could do big things. We never thought we couldn't do them. So we continue to have these big ideas. Why can't you have a National Black Arts Festival?
Big ideas.
Why can't you have an African exchange program where you're dealing with artists from all over the continent coming to? Why couldn't you do so and so? And as Stephanie and Baraka said, we would have these visions and we would sell it, so we could get the money to do it. And if we couldn't get the money, if we could collaborate with others, we would get the money.
Yes.
And what I see today is small ideas.
Yes.
Yep.
I do not see big ideas.
Especially coming out of the pandemic. You know, I mean, the pandemic kind of gave you a break to think. That's one problem that we always faced. We didn't have the time to really think and evaluate and think about what the big ideas were. But I don't think a lot of people took the time to do that.
No.
I think everybody was in survival mode. And so rather than figuring out what is this big idea we're going to come out of this with, I think people just got scared, and that's one thing I can say. We ain't never been scared.
Right.
Well, somebody, just quickly, one person said to me once when I was traveling, I was in Nigeria, and everybody told me not to go because they were in the middle of a coup d'etat, literally. They had asked all kinds of people, Amiri Baraka, and I was the only, people from the Kennedy Center, I was the only one. And when I got there, I realized why I was the only one who went. I mean, they were literally in some places, I was in the back of the car and they were covering me with blankets. Because every 20 or 30 miles, you got stopped by not police, you got stopped by the military. And they said if they had known that I was American in the backseat of this car, that I would get what? Mugged, raped, and murdered. So I say all that I made that point because, I made that point because, well, I didn't
Big ideas.
Big ideas.
And fearlessness.
Oh, yes, that was it. Fearlessness. You've got to be fearless. And I also want to tie that into what Mikki said about the money. Because we have in the audience, is she still here? Linda Simmons. Oh, right here in front of me. Linda Simmons, who was on the board, she retired, but she was on the board of a consultant client I worked with, International Association of Blacks in Dance. When I first started working with International Association of Blacks in Dance, Denise Saunders Thompson was working in her basement out of boxes. The files were in boxes in her basement. When I left that organization as a consultant 5 years later, she had $3 million in the bank, a staff of 7 people, and yes, you can look them up on the cultural map. Now, I say all that because one of the points that Mikki made was when people started, as she was building the organization, and people were coming to her with this money, Mellon Foundation, same thing happened. Well, you should do this. Well, you should do that. And I said, tell them to keep their money. And Denise was like, can I do that? And I said, and if you don't, I will. Keep your money. We have to, I know I'm kind of going around in a circle, Michon, but this is about feeling power and feeling fierce. Yes, fierce and fearless. Be fierce and fearless. You can tell those foundations, unless it's a foundation Mikki's working for. Keep your money, because they're afraid of that. They're afraid of our power. We don't realize they have to. That's why they exist, is to give us their money. So if you say keep your money, you cannot imagine how they quake and tremble in their shoes. The black people don't want our money.
But you do have to be fearless, though, because they might not.
They might say,
but I have decided that it's okay. I really don't want your money. I'd rather be doing the work that I want to do than take your money. And you're going to do it at whatever cost. I mean, that is being an artist. That is being creative.
Truly.
Being able to just own your space and do what you want to do, and let them decide if they want to support you. We just been fearless. We really have been fearless our whole careers. Just,
individually and collectively.
But also, I think it's fearless, but I think it's also about who you are as a person. You cannot, you have to be true to yourself. So fearless, yes, but it's also, can I do this? Can I do something that I don't really believe in? You know? Or that I'm going to do for the money alone. Coming into the arts when we did, you didn't go into it for the money because it was you didn't get paid. But it does remind me of something, and I just want to say this about just having your own voice, which is about being fearless too. Is that, and I talked to a little bit about this with Rhonda and Stephanie earlier today. When I was at the Rockefeller Foundation, I went there because this woman, Angela Blackwell, was the vice president. Amazing woman. She was really in line to get the presidency. The person who was the president was going to be leaving. And then the board decided that they wanted to open it up and do a search. It was only fair because another vice president wanted the position. So they did that. She didn't get it. But when she brought me in, I said, I want to really work on international work, which we had been doing after exchange. And she said, you can do whatever you want. It's a new day here. When I come in, it's a new day. So I went in. So going in to do my work. Rockefeller Foundation at the time was one of the largest foundations doing working in the arts and culture arena internationally. I went to South Africa shortly after apartheid, and I went there as an officer, going to meet grantees because we were giving money to Market Theater and other places. I went to the Market Theater, and they had a play, and the play was based on truth and reconciliation. And some of the actors, at least 3 of them, were people who had actually experienced somebody's husband got killed. So, I mean, we're not talking about, oh yeah, well, I was in a protest and somebody's husband got killed. My children were killed, And this woman was talking, older woman was talking about this. And at the end, they had a talk back. And someone asked the woman, she wasn't an actress. She was a real person. And she said, how could you sit there and talk about day after day in this play about how your children or your husband was killed? How could you do that? She said, well, it's very cathartic for me to do this. And somebody, about 5 people down from me, the young brother, stood up and said, and then people were saying, oh yes, this is what arts can do for you. And he stood up and he said, well, it can't do that for me because my brother, or I can't remember who he said, was killed. And he said, in fact, if I had it done right now, I'd shoot the white person sitting next to me. Everybody just, it was, what? What? And they were saying, oh no, the art, this is what can help you, could really do. And I'm sitting there, I'm saying to myself, well, we just went through the civil rights movement, we went through a protest, and all of us were out there. You could be getting killed while you're out there. You clearly understand when someone's life has been taken, someone who's important to you, their life has been taken. The arts may not do that for you, really help you through that. Yes, it did for that woman, but maybe it wouldn't for him. And I got ready to get up and say, I hear you, but let's just hear him for a minute because maybe, and then I realized when I was getting ready to say this, that I work for the Rockefeller Foundation. It's like, I don't know that I can get up and say what I really want to say because that's Mikki Shepard talking, not the Rockefeller Foundation. And so the first time I realized you are doing their work because they paid you to do this. It is not your work. You came here to do your work to the foundation, but you have to remember that you do work for them. Now, there's a place there's a way you could find to kind of balance that out. But when I thought about that, I realized that maybe I can't be here. Maybe I can't.
Right.
And you make that decision. That was a good job. But it didn't align with my vision. And then the new president that came in, who was not Angela Blackwell, who, by the way, was the first non-American president of the Rockefeller Foundation, wanted to align the arts and culture with the rest of the foundation, which was about the sciences. What that meant to me is that the arts would be an instrument for the sciences. And I decided that is not what I do. So I decided to leave. But I say that just to say that it's so important to know what your values are, who you are as a person, what you believe in, and where you draw that line. Because otherwise you're just selling your soul. And it's not something that we can do.
So I'm just mindful of time.
Yes.
Because I do want to open up for the audience, but there are a couple of things that I do want to highlight before we take questions. One, I think it's really important, and perhaps I get to run digital media here, so perhaps there's another conversation in the future, but I think it's really important, Mikki, what you talked about, the change that you all got to see, right? Because part of the moment that we are in now. And I think it was one of the reasons why this is a really important conversation for us to have when we talk about support and when we talk about, and I just want to reflect some of the things that you all have said about trust and about faith and about connection and about integrity, and all of those pieces, all of those connecting threads are really important for all of us to lean on now, because I do believe that we are at another moment of significant change. When you talk about the pandemic and you talk about, I think we are in that moment. I want to make sure, because, you know, I want to make sure we open up for questions. But is there, before we do, is there anything that you all, I think, Baraka, you shared some beautiful sort of, here's what you do when you want to create sisterhood. Here's some very specific things. And I will actually get those from you so that we can put them on the website so that people can return to and connect to some of the wisdom that you all are sharing when we talk about a wisdom circle. Is there anything you want to say before we open up, that just in terms of speaking to sisterhood? Baraka.
One very important thing. I just want to acknowledge again and thank him. Well, first of all, I want to thank again our sister. I know it was probably said, but I want to thank Rhonda Green.
Yes.
For but she is also, if you don't know, you have a cultural warrior in your midst.
Yes.
Yeah. I also want to acknowledge Neil Barkley. Let me say this. We're talking here about sisterhood, but Neil has been doing this work as long as we have. Like I said, I first heard about Neil Barkley in 1993. That's 30 years ago. And what we don't talk about is where's the brotherhood of people who do the work that we do. Who did he lean on? Who did he talk to? Who did he pick up a phone and call? We don't talk about the brothers in our industry, because I'm sure for a lot of them, it might have even been harder, because they are directly, and I'm gonna say it, I'm not backing down, I'm gonna be fierce and fearless like this. They were up against a white male racist system. It's as plain as that. And all those people that we talked about, whether it was Houston International Festival or Brooklyn Academy of Music or Broadway or whoever, while we were given incredible opportunity, I don't deny that, incredible visionaries who saw what we were capable of, I think it was much harder for Black men to have those doors open for them. So I just want to applaud Neil.
We do have microphones, but I think everyone is comfortable, and I think we're in a good space where if you have a question, I want to sort of lift up, and so we'll start here.
I just want to give an explanation of thank you. I don't have a question. I just said thank you for pioneering this movement. I can remember back in the 60s, I was a part of what they call the African movement. My sister was in it, so we all were a part of it. It was a very exciting time. But what you've done to our culture is just amazing. And I want to thank you all. Thank you.
Here and then Jessica.
Well, first, I wanted to publicly, like my sister here, just say thank you to each of you as a personal moment of praise and gratitude, because you have individually fed into me and so many of my colleagues, and I know Waverly feels the same, but collectively as well. So just first of all, thank you. But I've got two parts. One is for Mikki, because you have like, it's almost...
Would you state your name? We know who you are. Would you state your name and where you're from?
Imari Kennedy from Atlanta, Georgia.
And a cultural producer also.
It's interesting because I think God sometimes puts you in spaces where there'd be a million people, but everything, the message is just for you. And so, Mikki, one thing I'd like for you to speak a little bit more on, and Steph and Baraka too, but when you're in those spaces and you realize you kind of have a double entendre that you're doing the work for the boss or what have you, but also you recognize that you are playing a role for the other people of color in the space, and how to balance that of when you say, when it's that time to say, okay, I've done what I can do here, versus I got a little bit more I need to do for the people here. You know what I mean? So that's one. And then two, I would love you all's thoughts. In this season, heightened season, I think we're always in the season of change and uncertainty. But in this heightened season of change and uncertainty, if you could speak to where you really feel the role of the arts and the artists play.
So let me say that, I think it's a conundrum, because you realize that you're in there, you're one of the few. And by the way, it was very hard for me to be in that space, because I was not someone who I left school to go and work in the arts.
Yeah.
I left because I saw an opportunity, and I knew it was pioneer territory, and I knew I could learn and I could contribute to it. So when you go to a Rockefeller Foundation, these people have PhDs. That's who they are. That doesn't. I honor and respect that, but it doesn't. I know enough people who don't have that, and the contributions that they've made. So that's not, for me, that's not the most important thing. But that's the environment that I was in. And so, and the fact that this Black woman hired me to come in to do this work was a problem. It was a problem. They had a problem with her, and they had a problem with me. And because the fact is that she should have been arrested, but they decided to do a search. And so, but what I also realized when I went in, because this is what's very important, I always feel you have to know your exit strategy when you enter, not later. You have to know from the beginning. When do I leave? When is the time for me to leave? What does that do when I achieve certain things? Whatever that is, you have to kind of know that. And so for me, what I knew was that if she doesn't get the job, I may have to leave. If the work, I have to feel out this organization to see if it's a place for me to be, and can I achieve the things that I set out to do. I knew once she left, I could not. So yeah, I could sit there and be a Black person in a space, but I felt I could accomplish more by being outside of that space. And as it turns out, I think I did. And I think in terms of your second question about the role of artists at this particular time, I think the role of artists when we came, because in some ways, this period is not that different from when we entered. It was a war going on. It was the Vietnam War. I was telling somebody the other day, when did they sign the anti-lynching bill? Last year? 2 years ago? There's other things like that still exist. Covenants in houses. The house that my mother bought in 1946 in Brooklyn had a covenant that said you could not sell to Black people. And it was and there were covenants that were in houses even into the 60s and 70s that said you could not sell these houses to Black people. So these things did exist. There was so much that we could not do as Black people. And women's rights, I thought civil rights movement, women's rights movement, gay, lesbian, workers' rights, we can go down the list of all the things that were happening, because it is very much about what's happening today. Very much like what's happening today. So the challenges were there, and so the challenges are here now. Artists played an essential role at that time, in terms of, especially in theater, I would say. In theater, I think in New York City, Gary Anderson is here from Plowshares, who's a brilliant brother. I heard about him before I met him, and I met him at the Black Theater Network conference this summer. And really talk about learning what I was learning from him. In New York City, there were at least 50 to 75 Black theater companies. Gary, do you know how many there are now? One?
Wow.
One. But the Black theater companies at that time were addressing the issues, and I mentioned Serafina because Serafina was something that, clearly had a tremendous impact in the world, not just in South Africa, but in the world. And so what I do see is that artists can have an impact. We saw that, so artists can do that. Because what they do is they actually, they can show people, well, joy certainly in terms of relief, but they also can address issues that, and bring people together around an issue that, and sometimes it's in a safer space, So I think that there's so much work that was done before that we can learn from, but there's no question about the fact that artists, even now, can do it. But we also have to support them. You know, we can't, because artists, you know, they're like the poorest people, quite frankly.
Before we move, oh, go.
I was just gonna say, I think that, you know, it's what we were able to do was for our generation. I mean, we could see the need. My grandmother used to always say success was finding a need and filling it. I think for your generation now, you have to really assess what are the needs. And then how do you, in your creative spaces, figure out how to address those needs? And I believe, because it's not about the art. People aren't funding the art per se.
Yeah.
It's not art for art's sake.
Yeah.
So it's your relevance to the community in these times, your relevance to the field in these times. And I don't profess to have all the answers, but I've always believed that it had something to do with being able to see yourselves and your work by the masses now.
I've got an answer.
So,
I got the answer. Let me just say something, because this really, I know we're taping this, so I can't use that word. This really ticks me off. Because artists, especially Black artists, I'm looking at Jessica Care, we've got artists who have been on the front lines of everything for decades, if not centuries. And what really ticks me off, I'm gonna be brief, is when I hear funders and people talking about, we're gonna fund social justice. I'm like, as if it's some new thing. I'm like, what the hell do you think we have been doing for 50 to 100 years? Nothing but damn social justice. So don't come to me talking about, well, now we're changing, we don't fund art anymore, we're funding social justice. Yeah, when were you funding the Amiri Barakas? We were funding the Amiri Barakas of the world. That's where they were getting their support from. We were funding the Sonia Sanchez of the world. So don't even, this whole thing, I am so sick and tired of all the slogans we've come up with, multiculturalism, equity, diversity, inclusion. Now, one of the people are upset because those are just slogans, buzzwords, and cliches. Do the damn work. And you won't need the buzzwords and the cliches, and it drives, as you can tell, like I'm trying there. Like Mikki said, we can get kind of loud, but it drives me crazy. I know Jessica has the microphone, but I just want to say one last thing, and that was a quote I heard forgive me, I'm having a senior moment. Angela Davis speak in New York not long ago, and she said, diversity, equity, inclusion.
Yes.
She said it's about revolution.
Yeah.
We have always been about revolution. And if you're not doing revolution, you need to go sit down somewhere.
Amen.
I don't know if this is even on or working or whatever.
Okay.
I'm loud.
Yeah,
So,
Jessica, I want to pass it to Jessica.
oh, yeah, it's just not working. I'm listening to you, Mama Gia. I'm listening.
But it don't work.
I use it if it works.
I could be Phil Donahue.
There we go. Hey, new
Thank you, Michelle.
it's new
You're welcome.
microphones.
And before you
It's
go,
a-
Jessica, I just want to highlight my earrings by
I have
the phenomenal
I have on the same
Sabrina
earrings.
Nelson. Come on,
I want to
earrings.
acknowledge that we have on the same earrings.
By the artist Sabrina Nelson. I just wanted to make
My
sure we
sister.
highlight that frontline program when you talk about the front lines.
I guess it's
Go ahead,
on.
Jessica.
I guess, hey, what? I just, I wouldn't be here if not for the women on this stage. I've performed at every space that you've all worked in. But I'm really tired. I've been in California for the last 10 days, but I'm moved by Stephanie's presence because you guys all know I've been doing Black Women Rock here. I started Black Women Rock 20 years ago at the National Black Arts Festival because of Stephanie Hughley saying yes to that. So I built an institution inside of an institution that you were the director of. And I've since brought it to the Apollo Theater and to the Rwanda Center for the Arts in Pittsburgh, thanks to Janice Burley over in the August Wilson Center. But I need to acknowledge Juanita Moore. Where is she? She moved over there. Juanita Moore, who's here. Hello. We need to acknowledge Juanita Moore, who's the former director, CEO of the Charles H. Wright Museum, who, if not for her, Black Women Rock became an annual event here at the Charles H. Wright. And when I brought it back to her after leaving Atlanta, coming back home, it was Juanita, after I repacked this place out to fire code, said, well, this needs to happen every single year, not just, it's not a one-off event. Right. And so thank you, Anita, I love you, and I appreciate you. And Black women, amen. And so, yeah, I am a poet. I'm not broke, and I don't believe in it, and because I'm from Detroit, and we have to have certain shoes. And so I built institutions around my art, which has made me, the reason why I'm still here as an artist is because for 30 years I have been building institutions, not just to support myself, but to publish the work of other poets like Saul Williams and Raz Baraka and Asha Bentali, and right now Brad Walron, and now More Black Press is now More Black Press, HarperCollins. But I have learned from every woman. I don't know Mikki Shepard. I know exactly who you are, but I haven't worked with you as directly as I have with Baraka, who's brought me to countless things, and to Stephanie, who was like in my beautiful beginnings, in my 20s when I met you. And so just want to talk about Black institution building because I produced Black Women Rock's 20th anniversary at the Fillmore up the street, and I need you all to know I did it with my own money. Ford Foundation didn't give me no. So sometimes you have to know, well, you know, you can look at yourself. Like, well, Ford Foundation has funded me, and Quicken Loan has funded me, but they're not doing it this year. Am I going to not do my 20th anniversary?
Right,
No, I'm still going to do my show at the bigger venue that I've ever been at. Mm-hmm. And I did that with my own poetry money, right? Yes. And so I wasn't going to let some white institutions decide if my event was going to happen. And so that power in that is that I built enough capital of my own as an artist and put it in the bank so I could fund my own ideas. So I don't have to ask them for no money. So I'm going to talk about Black institution building. Because I'm a metaphorical daughter of Mary and Sonia. Those are my mothers and fathers and Gil, and those are the people I came up under as a poet. So I want to talk about, it's cool to work with white institutions, but I want to work with more Black institutions, and I want to find more ways to get money from Black people to build my Black institution instead of asking for white folks for money. Mm-hmm. All right. That's my question. Where's the Black money? Where's the Black money? The Black green money.
I wonder if you all can speak to the space of, and I think part of what what it resonates for me, Jessica, and I think you referenced it, is that pioneering space. And so can you all just sort of, and I'll say briefly, because I'm mindful of time. We have one more question up top, and then I do want to make sure, and then a question here, and then I have to be mindful of time. But while we are passing the mic, if you can give the mic to the gentleman there, thank you. Could you speak to what you believe pioneering spirit in this day and age looks like and means? Because I think that's what resonates for me. If you are not funded, you're going to do it anyway. That's pioneering spirit. So when we are in these modern days, we don't hear so much about pioneers, but can you all just sort of speak to, before we have the question here, what does pioneering spirit look like today?
This is not rocket science. It looks like Jessica Kier Moore. Yeah, it looks like, yes, it looks like exactly what she described. This is part of the myth that we've fallen into, that we have to depend upon other folks to create and build our own institutions and to have our own work. And so, I cannot applaud Jessica enough, but there are other Jessica Moores out there. Right. Mm-hmm. We're just not supporting them, finding them, lifting them up, elevating them. And that's literally how you build Black institutions. It's just what she's doing. One of the programs that I brought to NJPAC was just called Jessica Moore Press. And actually we brought Ross Baraka.
Oh, More Black Press, yes.
Yes, and we brought 2 or 3 other folks.
Maybe Saul.
Yes, and so we have to realize, I can't emphasize it enough, that we do have the power if we are fierce and fearless. You know, we could speak about so many organizations her organization still exists. 651 Arts still exists. The Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute still exists in East Harlem. I mean, yes, we've lost a lot of institutions, but a lot of National Black Arts Festival. These institutions still exist. We have got to lift them up instead of always running to somebody else.
And I guess I would only add to that, as Stephanie referenced it, and Baraka just said it too, is that, you know, there was a program that we did called Lost Jazz Shrines, which was a program with 10 different cities around the country, and it was about, in our communities before integration, you had these jazz shrines, you had, you know, clubs and ballrooms, and that's where everybody went. When there was integration, everybody was leaving those places to go someplace else. We supported the black businesses that were there. The churches were places that were the presenters in those communities. They presented a lot of the concerts that occurred. People supported a lot of the visual arts. Our universities, like the HBCUs, they're the biggest collectors of black art. So it is in that, it's in the community. And so this idea that if we detach ourselves from our communities and we don't have that support, why are we asking someone else to support us? We have to really think about how we, as Stephanie said, what are the needs of our community? Do they think we're important enough to be in existence? You know? And I think it's really important for us to go back to that, because if I think about the pioneering time, well, we didn't have any money when we started. That's right. A lot of these organizations didn't have any money. And when we talked about when they got funding, they got no money. It was nothing. But they continued to do it. And a lot of them were the individual donors of their own organizations. It was their money. And they had other jobs in order to pay for that. That maybe wasn't right, but they did it. And they were very connected to, they had audiences. It wasn't a problem with audience development. They had the audiences. They lived in those communities. And so I think we do have to think about that. Two things, Dance Africa. When we built, Chuck and I built Dance Africa, we had talked about this. You know, that's the other thing, is about having a plan. You got to have a plan. And Chuck and I talked about that. We needed a plan for Dance Africa that was going to mean it was going to exist, because it was the Brooklyn Academy of Music. We might not always be there, but how could it exist? So we have to build a village. We have to build a community, and people have to have ownership of it. And so we built it so that the vendors, you know, they had the outdoor bazaar, they were part of it. The artists, certainly. The people who lived in the community, you have to understand too, Brooklyn at that time had a big black nationalist community, right? The East was there, and there were just a lot of things going on. So it was easier to a certain degree. Dance Africa is 45 years old.
Yeah.
And it exists not because the Brooklyn Academy of Music wants it to exist. It's because that community will not let it not exist. That's the truth. Okay. The other thing is, I want to say something about August Wilson. When we talk about building black institutions, August Wilson did a keynote address at Theater Communications Group called "The Ground on Which We Stand." And when he gave this speech, he talked about having black theaters, because you couldn't rely on white theaters to hire the actors, the playwrights, the directors, the black directors, the set design. You know, we needed to have that. Well, people walked away from that and said, "Black, you know, separate but equal. You know, how could we do that?" And it was a big mess. And you know, and some people were like, "Well, what's he talking about? His shows are being done all over the place. He should be happy. Why is he talking about this black?" Well, the bottom line was, no, it was not equal. You know, these black theater companies, as I said, there were tons of them at one point, and now all of a sudden they were gone. Why were they gone? Yeah. But I think that, and what happened was, he got together with, do you remember the man at Dartmouth, the professor?
Yes, Victor Leo Walker.
Leo Walker. And they put together with others this conference, this Black Theater Conference, only for, you were there. Yeah. Right? And I remember when they were trying to find funding for it, and they went to a lot of funders, and they wouldn't give them any money. I just happened to be at the Rockefeller Foundation, and Leo called me because somebody told him to call me, and he said, "We need this money," and they won't. And I knew about what was happening out there, and I said, "Okay, well, I can give you $50,000, you know." And then I called the Ford Foundation, Christine Vincent, same person, and said, could you match my money, because they need this money. And she put the money up for it. And I just said to myself, you mean we cannot do this? I mean, these funders are not gonna give this man the money to do this conference? For me, it was one of the best conferences I've ever been to, because it had people from all sectors of a community out there, not just Black theater people, business people, I mean, just all kinds of people there. And they were talking about this new, and I don't know exactly what happened, Gary.
It dissolved because of a lack of focus. And specifically after his passing, it lost all the energy.
Yeah. But it was one of the most, to me, it had the opportunity for that to really change things. There really was that, but the fact that they would not give him that money, but I was a Black person in an institution, and it's, well, let's do this. Right? So I think it just goes back to, again, what's different about today. You have an opportunity today. You have an opportunity. The opportunity is that everything, the people before the pandemic, organizations were fragile. We're talking about the business model doesn't work anymore. And so we need something different. What does that look like? So you're starting from scratch.
How big is your vision?
And so how can you now think about what does this look like going forward? It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. I feel like that things are always kind of the same, but different titles and stuff. But I mean, we've been in a struggle since we got here. And so I think that it's about vision and it's about collaboration. It's about finding your village. That's what you took that out. Village, yes. You have to find your village. We found our village in a time of struggle. And we found ways to make it work. We found there was nothing like the National Black Arts Festival. So yeah, let's just blow this thing up. I had gone to Edinburgh and I was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's make the symphony play with the Black conductors and the Black composers. And yeah, you want to be at this festival, so you do that. It's finding, you gotta have the vision. My vision for the Black Arts Festival never got fulfilled, but it didn't stop me from going there, right? So I just encourage you, I mean, yes, it takes fearlessness, it takes courage, it takes persistence. People gonna tell you no more than people gonna tell you yes, but you don't stop. We said we just keep going, no matter what, the challenge, we say, okay, look, they don't want to do it. Who else? We'll figure this out. Who else can do it? Who else can do it? Can the church do it? Can the club do it?
I know. You're trying to get to this. Oh, I'm sorry. But when she said, okay, this goes back to Jessica's question as well. And what Mikki said. We also need to think about what I call, and I think a lot of people use this term, cross-sector relationships. In other words, don't just look to only artists and arts organizations. Throughout my career, I have built collaborations with politicians, with ministers, with firefighters, with hospital workers, with hospitals. And that's also my community and the people I work with. When I commissioned the work by Hannibal Akumbe, which was a year-long project, we sent him down to Mississippi to do a project called God, Mississippi, and a man called Evers. We paid for him to live in Mississippi for a year, and then, and then brought him to Newark, and I said, but I have to have you come to Newark so I can build an audience. And I said, so what do you want to do in Newark? And he said 3 things. I want to work with churches, children, and prisons. And we did all 3. For a year, Pearl Wise Crowley created the Ministers' Council. We met with churches for a year. We met with schools for a year in Newark. And we even got him to be able to do poetry workshops in a prison. So by the time we got to the concert, the ministers and the church people were coming, the children, their parents, the teachers were coming, and we were even able to get the young men out of prison who had worked in his poetry workshop for that performance. It's got to be cross-sector. You've got to talk to everybody. You never know who's got what and who's got this.
and it takes time.
Yeah.
You can't think that you're gonna turn this all around in a minute. You have to be committed to the work, to the vision. And however long that takes, you have to stick with it and have the courage to stand your ground and keep it moving.
Okay, all right. So we have, okay, so just for context.
Poor Michon.
I love this. This is wonderful. So, at 8:45, we have to exit the building. So by 9 o'clock, we have to be out of here. And that is to honor, they have been here since 6 a.m. So I want to make sure I honor their time. With that said, Frontline Profit, I want to encourage people to see that exhibition. It is open. We have the artists here. And so Sabrina Nelson, she was just. So I do want to, if you have not seen it, I do want to encourage you all to do that. However, there is also a reception. There are 2 people who had questions, and I want to honor that as well. So what we gonna do together is we're gonna ask the questions, we're gonna respond, then we will break.
With short answers.
With short answers. We will break, and then if you should so choose, you should see Frontline Profit. I highly recommend if you have not, or even if you have, to see it again. And then we have some refreshments. But I do, and I am gonna say something to close, but I just wanted to set the context so that we all can be mindful of our time, because we do have to exit the building by 9 o'clock. All right, so you have the mic, 7:45 now. Let's go.
All right, short question. Well, first of all, my name is Anthony Barber, and I host a broadcast titled Strong Inspiration to Sing Around the World. It's on YouTube. And so my question is, what has been the reception as you all have traveled to Africa from women over in Africa who responded to you coming with learning about their programs, them trying to learn about what you're doing, and have y'all been able to build relationships with some of them to help grow what they're doing over there? That's all pretty short.
Okay, hold on. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I have some wonderful friends who were in South Africa, now they moved to Ghana, who are helping build relationships between governments, and a lot of women are at the forefront of those conversations and building arts organizations there. And I know about South Africa and Ghana and Senegal. So I think that there is great opportunities, again, as Africa is really trying to build itself and begin to build relationships between the governments and the countries. I think there's great opportunity to build relationships with people in Africa, especially the artists.
Let me say one thing. I was thinking when you said that, I thought about Africa Exchange, because that's exactly what the work was. That we were going there to support the artists there as well as the artists in the United States. What was interesting about going there to support the artists was that they really didn't need our support, because they were not looking at the United States to help them do anything. Many of them had done work in Europe and had done work where they were. The brothers in Mozambique, Suleiman Kohli in Cote d'Ivoire, Jermaine Akogny in Senegal. There were so many people who had already built something. What we were trying to do is make these connections. And I felt that
It's a mistake and a presumption that we have. Just like Donald Trump is going around saying, Africa is what does he call it? A garbage dump and a pit. We, unfortunately, have the same perception of our brothers and sisters in Africa unless we've been there.
Yep.
African people are doing incredible and amazing work. And the specific example, because he read our beads, one of the first artists of African Exchange was Suleiman Kohli in Cote d'Ivoire. And when we first met with him, brought him to Brooklyn, and he said, nobody asked me if I wanted to work with American artists. If you really want to help me, you can buy me a piano. And we were like, okay, this is gonna be a rough ride. It's a presumption that we have. I mean, there are many African artists who could be helping us. But to your particular point, one of the women that I have been able to stay in contact with that Mikki mentioned is Germaine Akoni, who has a beautiful school in, have you been there?
Where's that?
Tuba Jalal in Dakar. Okay, so she has a fabulous school. She teaches, is a school of both traditional and contemporary dance. The thing that I encouraged her to do, and I actually just saw her not long ago, I see this brother looking at his watch, I'm trying to make this short. I now encourage, going back to the going back to the cross-sector relationships, I actually just did this with a theater company in Massachusetts. I tell them you need to go to your state government and tell them to make you a line item in their budget. So I just did that with a theater company in Massachusetts, and Germaine Akoni in Dakar 2 years ago, she became a line item in the Senegalese government. So those are the things, and she just did a fabulous performance in New York. I sent out invitations to people to encourage them to come. That's one of the examples. But like Mikki said, most of the folks have gone on and done their own fabulous work that they were doing before we even met them.
It's really an exchange. It's an exchange.
Yeah.
There's knowledge there. We learned.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say we were the ones learning
from them.
Yeah.
And in terms of just as women going, I don't know. I think that we have no issues as women going in to do.
That's why I say there's great opportunities. You just got to do it.
Except that when you and I went to Johannesburg,
Oh,
they told us not to go.
Right there.
Go.
Right there in that cab, just take it away, though.
Wait, did that really answer your question? Oh.
I'm going to be brief. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Hermione Pickens. I'm from Detroit. I am born and raised here. I am 72 years old, 73 next month. I unfortunately have been bereft of any knowledge of these three phenoms on the stage, and only had an opportunity to find out who you are because my dear beloved cohort next to me, Imara, invited me to come tonight. And so I don't have any questions of you, but I do have a few observations from some of what I learned tonight, which was an education for real. Your relationship, as you described it, was like a woven fabric, but 21st century that can actually not be rent asunder. You said that some people were trying to poke holes and all of that. They will never succeed. Never succeed. This is what I get from the three of you. And the things that you shared, I see as necessary storytelling, and not as resumes per se. I absorbed more, far more, just because it was told in the storytelling format and not read from a document or, list A, B, C, D, E, and then 1, 2, 3, and then I.
Go girl.
The other thing is that you're not texting anyone daily that you don't love phenomenally.
Right.
So I see that and witness that just from the speaking that you've shared tonight, that you must have a phenomenal love for each other all these decades. It's fearless and fierce, as you put it. I so appreciate learning a new term. It's new for me, cultural warriors, which I'm taking back to the city. Let's see, what else? The ideas and concepts and things that you came up with that were macro in scope, and then maybe whittle back just a little bit in case it didn't work 300% macro, but never micro, not making any significant differences in, the work that you were doing. That I appreciate, understanding that was your approach. That was the elixir of what was so successful in this triumvirate here. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because I just want to know who you are.
I'm just turning on. But I'm a writer. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. I have a science background. I'm a math geek. I'm left and right brain, so I don't have time to figure out which one. It just takes over as it will, depending on the situation. In our family, we had boy, girl, boy, and then girl, and that was me, the youngest. I defied everything in our family. Only myself and my dad are left-handed. All the rest right-handed. So we had our own exclusivity there. This is who I am. I am sometimes defiant, but I'm very observant. And I knew that I didn't know anything about these women, but I was intrigued by the prospect of listening to women talk about their support of each other and sharing their experiences with each other. That's what was going to move my heart tonight. Hearing all this, and it is definitely moved. That's me.
Because, first of all, thank you so very much for your wise words. One of the things that you said, yes, we text each other every day. One of the things that's really important that we haven't mentioned is we've also learned to get used to each other's idiosyncrasies. Not just different ways of thinking, but different ways of being. I actually tend to be reclusive and quiet. Stephanie's the social butterfly. She likes to be with the people. Like I said, Mikki's always kind of the even keel in the middle. But let me just say this. What I love about these women, and when you brought up texting, reminded us of texting, and I don't usually text people every day. I don't really talk to people every day. And that's why I love them, because they have put up with, Stephanie was calling me when we were getting ready to talk about, come over here and look at the scarf I'm getting ready to put on. Should I put on this? I was like, Stephanie, leave me alone. I'm trying to get dressed myself. Then this morning, Rhonda knows I am not a morning person. I'm just not a morning person. I don't want to eat. I don't want to talk to anybody. Mikki's calling me, well, come to lunch. I can just come to lunch. I'm on lunch. And they still put up with me, and they still love me. Now, one important thing I want to talk about that we've taught also sweep under the rug is colorism. Mm-hmm. Now you see the different colors sitting on this stage. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about them, because I have been treated mighty poorly by some women in our own community who look like them. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it has never, ever come up in a conversation obviously didn't make a difference. There was once when I was getting ready to apply for a job in the South, and somebody said to me, this was a black woman of their complexion, said, didn't bat an eye and said, aren't you too dark to apply for that job? Mm-hmm. That's something I know the two of them would have never have said. Mm-hmm.
This is an ex-you.
Right.
You actually know this person well. So, this is...
I know that's right.
Shoot a quick text.
So this is important, that people love you for what you are, no matter what your complexion might be, no matter what your idiosyncrasies might be, whether you eat breakfast in the morning or like me, you eat breakfast at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And so the other thing is that we all acknowledge that Baraka is the queen. So.
That's right. I want to thank you. I want to thank each of you. I think that it is, and thank you, because I'm not going after that so much.
That was fire.
For you all for this to have been one of the first times that you've spoken about your connection, the other two women that you uplifted. It is an honor to be here for all of us. And I am a child of the work of you all, and you all have poured into me. And I am grateful personally. And I also think that I come from a space of support. I did not know that there was not a space of Black women supporting Black women. And when I learned that, when Rhonda talked about this conversation, I was like, absolutely, let's have it, because let's lift it up so that anyone who does not feel that support can start to begin to learn to either build it for themselves or embrace it or begin to feel it. And that is something that I think is critically important. And so being able to sit here on stage and be a part I'm grateful, but this room is filled with gratitude for what you all do.
And she was really the backbone of the organization. And I know that my daughter was so sad when she left. And I can see why. Yeah. So I want to thank her. And I also do want to thank Neil Markley. Me too. I just want to say, because most people probably don't realize this, but Neil built the Older Schools Center in Pittsburgh. He started 5 years before the building opened. And he raised the money, did the programming, hired the staff, he did everything. And he was only there for the first year, I think, of it opening. But we talk about building institutions. That man knows how to build an institution. So I want to thank him because he's been, as Baraka said, a brother in this struggle with us. And talk about idiosyncrasy. Well, that's another story. I love it.
Well, thank you all. So again, please have a topic. Please have a reception. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being a part of the community, and I'm grateful.
Me too.
And become a member if you're not. Please. Yes.
Hi. No. Nice to meet you. Do you know Sabrina already?
I was just saying, I saw her
I'll scoop her up and she ain't gonna be a elbow.
Make that happen. We are in conversation.
Look.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we've been talking.
Yes, yeah. She's interested in.
No, we've really been talking. I know. Like a lot. Just haven't been.
How about that?
It's crazy how I need it and Stephanie. I want a picture with my name.
Hey, Dad, we have flight.
Oh.